Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Optic Theology Podcast. My name is Andy Schmidt, and I am here by myself once again. Wasn't really planning on doing this podcast, as you can probably tell by the name of the podcast. This is going to be about the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. And yesterday was celebrating my dad's birthday. We weirdly at dinner, lunch/dinner, were discussing which presidents historically have had assassination attempts. We talked about Theodore Roosevelt and FDR, who both had people attempted to kill them. And then later that night, there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and was up all night long watching the news, watching the Daily Wire, watching cable news on Twitter, X, trying to figure out exactly what was going on. It was a long night. I was up till 2 a.m. I recorded the podcast last night at like 2 a.m. I then woke up this morning, went to church, and then tried to rewatch it. And it was, you could tell that it was recorded at 2 a.m. Let's just say that. And so I decided I was going to hop on here and try to re-record. There's been some new details that have come out about the situation. And for those of you that don't know, I think most people probably should or know by now, but last night Trump was doing a political rally, a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, and there was a shooter within, I think, 150 yards of him on the top of a building who tried to assassinate him. One person was fatally shot. One person in the crowd was killed, was murdered by this shooter. Trump's ear was grazed, and there was a lot of blood all over his face. His ear was grazed. It seems that he's actually okay. He's actually fine. I'm going to show the video, and for those of you listening, you'll hear the video. I'm sure a lot of you have already seen it, but you'll probably be seeing it a lot over the next couple of months. This is, I think, the first assassination attempt on a president, a former president, or a presidential candidate in my life. It is. I think the last one, they say, the last assassination attempt was on Ronald Reagan at the end of his second term. That sent him to the hospital. I think it hurt somebody on his staff pretty badly. It's the first one that I've seen. It's the first one that I've been alive for, and it is shocking, but it's obviously a picture. It's a picture of what's happening in the country at a larger level, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, we're going to watch this video. It's a very short 11-second video of the shooting.
Couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
So as you can see, Trump's giving a speech. All of a sudden, gunshots fire, and he kind of grabs for his head, grabs for his ear, drops to the ground, gets tackled by his Secret Service men, and then the video stops. There's more after that. They kind of stand up. The Secret Service is all around. You kind of hear some other shots ring out. Those are the shots that are killing the shooter. And Trump, he pumps his fist to the crowd and he says, "Fight, fight, fight!" And then they start chanting USA. And it was a very, very inspiring, very cool response from Donald Trump in the face of death. He almost died in the situation. The bullet grazed his ear. It was centimeters away from him being fatally shot and killed. And it was a completely shocking moment. So the whole situation has been a little bit bizarre, a little bit weird. There's been a lot of questions surrounding the Secret Services. Why were they not checking this building that was 150 yards away from Donald Trump? There was Secret Service all over the place, but there wasn't any at that building. That building apparently hadn't been cleared. There had apparently been people in the crowd who had saw somebody go and climb up that building with a gun. In other videos, you can hear people saying, "Hey, there's somebody with a gun, and nobody is doing anything." And so there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of confusion around this entire situation. And I think that over time, we're going to start getting more and more details. The Speaker of the House Oh gosh, Speaker of the House. I should know the name of the Speaker of the House. Right now, the Speaker of the House is Mike Johnson. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, announced that they're going to be doing a investigation on the whole entire situation. There are a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions. One of those questions is not who did it. They have identified a shooter, and it is a 20-year-old male Trump rally shooter identified as 20-year-old Pennsylvanian male Matthew Crooks of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. The motive, they say, was not clear, but motive. I think you can make some pretty good assumptions as to why somebody tried to kill Donald Trump. So this guy Matthew Crooks, it looks like he's a registered Republican, is what people are saying, which is a little bit interesting. It's confusing. He had never voted before. He doesn't really have a voting record because this would have been the first time that he would have been able to vote. So he doesn't have a voting record. He did give $15 to some Democrat organization, and that's been reported on. So his political affiliation is somewhat ambiguous at this point. Nobody really knows what the motivation was for this guy's trying to murder Donald Trump. His dad came out and said that he wasn't going to give a press release. He wasn't going to give any sort of thoughts on this until there was more information on, or coming from the police, coming from an investigation on the situation. But the guy was a 20-year-old, a young person, which is incredibly sad. He's dead. He was shot and killed immediately after, and so the whole situation is absolutely horrific. So yeah, Trump was shot. He was grazed by the ear. There's one person that did die. There is a GoFundMe that I can put the link in the description for the family of the guy that was killed. I believe that also for the families of the people who were injured. There was a couple other people that were injured, and so people can give money to that. And Trump has come out and given a statement. It says, "I want to thank the United States Secret Service and all of law enforcement for their rapid response in the shooting that just took place in Butler, Pennsylvania. Most importantly, I want to extend my condolences to the family of the person at the rally who was killed, and also to the family of another person that was badly injured. It is incredible that such an act can take place in our country." Nothing is known at this time about the shooter, who is now dead. "I was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper right of my right ear. I knew immediately that something was wrong, and that I heard a whizzing sound, shots, and immediately felt the bullet ripping through the skin. Much bleeding took place, so I realized then what was happening. God bless America." And so, yeah, Trump campaign added to that statement saying, "President Trump thanks law enforcement and first responders for their quick action during this heinous act. He is fine, and he is finally being checked out at a local medical facility." He ended up leaving that medical facility last night late, and there were questions around if he was going to go to Milwaukee this next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I believe the Milwaukee RNC Republican National Convention is being held in Milwaukee, which makes no sense. I think people were asking that a while back. Why are we holding this in Milwaukee, one of the most progressive liberal states or cities in America, one of the most run down Democratic cities in the entire country? It seems like a very bad idea to hold this in Milwaukee, which is only an hour away from where I live. And so I think things are going to heat up. There's a lot of questions that are unanswered. The motive, the particular specific motive, who this shooter was affiliated with, what his political viewpoints were. But it's obviously clear that this was an assassination attempt, that this killer obviously wanted to murder Donald Trump, the former president of the United States of America. Joe Biden took forever to make an announcement to go out in front of to address the nation on the situation. He immediately addressed the nation by saying that this is a sick act. This is no place for this in this country. But he could not figure out whether or not this was an assassination attempt because, quote unquote, don't have enough details, which is absolutely ridiculous rhetoric. Everybody knows this is a assassination attempt. It doesn't take a genius to try to figure out that somebody tried to assassinate the former president of the United States. The fact that Joe Biden couldn't figure out that this was an assassination attempt is indicative of who he is and who he's been historically. He can't really figure out many things, but one of the things that connected in my mind immediately was that Joe Biden is very hesitant to say that this is a assassination attempt, but 4 years ago, when George Floyd overdosed on fentanyl and died, he was very quick, and the rest of the Democrats were very quick to say that that was murder. They called murder on that. Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, and in my opinion, in the opinion of many others, incited violence, had the entire country up in flames. Joe Biden was very quick to say that's murder, but he's very, very hesitant to say whether or not this is attempted assassination or I don't know what other option there is in the situation. Somebody must have accidentally, the shooter must have thought that this was a shooting range and that that Donald Trump was just accidentally there and he was just trying to shoot his gun and practice. And so I don't really know what Joe Biden was thinking. He wanted to get more details before he went an official statement that it is an assassination attempt, which is just classic from the Democrats. They can't give any ground on anything ever because they have a bitter and deep hatred for Donald Trump, which is super weird. Why they hate? I mean, I know why they hate Donald Trump. It's obvious why they hate Donald Trump, but the more that these sorts of things continue to happen, you can go back to the 2016 election when the Democrats were saying that, oh, there's Russian collusion. This election was rigged. It's Russian collusion. And then obviously that didn't help their case. People became more in favor of Donald Trump because there was an absolutely baseless accusation. There was absolutely zero evidence as to Russian collusion in the 2016 election. The reason Trump won the 2016 election is because the Democrats put up one of the worst political candidates in American history in Hillary Clinton, the robot. She had absolutely no emotions. She was a complete puppet of the left ideology, and so they had to find somebody to blame. They had to find something to blame because there's no way in their head that their liberal progressive ideology could lose to somebody like Donald Trump, but they did. They lost to Donald Trump, so they started calling Russian collusion. That ended up being completely baseless. There's obviously the most recent situation before this assassination attempt to put Trump behind bars. There was that totally backfired on them. There was the mugshot of Trump that came out, and he ended up raising, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $100 million. Like within 24 hours, people were just shoveling money on over to the Trump campaign after that. And so all of these sorts of things have backfired on the left. All of these huge monumental moments in the last 8 to 10 years, with the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and now the 2024 election, the left trying so hard to push back against Donald Trump in a lot of ways has just made his candidacy stronger, made his campaigns stronger. And I've always thought the whole thing is bizarre that they continue to push back against him, because I think if they were to just shut up and not even talk about him and just ignore him, I think they would beat him because Trump isn't necessarily liked by a lot of people on the right. He's not necessarily, he's hated by everybody on the left. And so I just think all they would have to do is shut up and just let him talk, and they could probably win even with a dementia patient like Joe Biden. But they are so angry. They're so hate-filled towards this guy. And so they can't be quiet about him, and they end up helping him. So there's these, obviously, what people are saying, iconic photos that are coming out of this situation last night, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And with him raising his fists in the air, you got the American flag in the background, and there's the video, and after he stands up after getting shot at, and he says, "Fight, fight, fight," and USA, USA, and the crowd starts chanting USA. All of this stuff is making him look stronger. I mean, last night, look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I was probably not going to vote for Donald Trump. I was very frustrated. As you heard in the previous podcast before this one, I am very frustrated with the Republicans' position on abortion, or lack of position on abortion, that came out in this new 25 points for the Republican Party going forward that Donald Trump put out and his team put out. There was nothing on abortion. Is very frustrating, and I'm still very frustrated with it. After what happened last night, Oh, interesting. My brother just texted me. Apparently, Trump is going to another rally today or convention. I think he's talking about the RNC, the Republican National Convention. So interesting. So yeah, I think he will be there at the RNC. He will be. He was going to actually delay his arriving there for 2 days, but he decided. He came out with a statement saying, "You know what? No, I'm not going to let something like this hold me back. I am going to go to Milwaukee. I'm going to be there the whole time." So he isn't skipping the Republican National Convention. He is going, and that's just gonna it's gonna be a wild week. But I was frustrated with the Republican Party. I was frustrated with Donald Trump. But after last night, after somebody tried to murder the former president of the United States because of and we're going to get into this, but because one, the shooter was a sick individual, and the shooter made the absolutely on their own accord made the decision to go and try to murder the former president of the United States. So I'm not going to try to place blame on anybody else, but I will say that you don't make these decisions in a vacuum. You don't make these decisions disconnected from anybody else. And I think that the leftist rhetoric coming from universities, coming from the media over the past 10 years that Trump is a Hitler-esque authoritarian fascist who is going to come in and take everybody's rights away and kill his political opponents and yada, 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 yada. That sort of rhetoric for 10 straight years over and over and over again pushes people towards making radical and psychopathic decisions and doing things that they might not have done had they not been pumped up with absolutely nonsensical leftist rhetoric over a period of 8 to 10 years. And so we'll get into that in a little bit, but I decided last night, I was like, I'm voting for Donald Trump. I don't even care anymore. I am frustrated with the lack of direction in certain capacity. I do think that the Republican Party is still it is a slightly less liberal party in a lot of ways than the Democrats, but you don't to me, you don't things get really, really, really bad when you're trying to murder and take out a political candidate, when you're trying to take out somebody who's running against the current Democrat Joe Biden. When things get so bad politically, this is indicative of the leftist rhetoric. This is indicative of the Biden administration for the last 4 years. Joe Biden comparing Donald Trump to Hitler on multiple occasions, saying that the greatest threat to democracy is Donald Trump, and that's why he's running, is because he needs to save democracy and the Democrats need to save democracy. When you push this rhetoric on people, when you push this rhetoric on young 20-year-olds who don't know what they're talking about, they don't have they don't have a solidified political ideology or philosophy, and they're listening to this stuff constantly from the president, from the media, and they're in school. The public school system is pushing this ideology on these kids. They end up doing crazy radical stuff like this, and I can't vote in favor of that. And I'm not going to just throw my vote at a third party. I think RFK is probably a fine guy. His stance on abortion is similar to Trump's, similar to Biden's. There's not much difference between the two of them, but I'm not going to throw my vote away on a third party candidate. I am going to vote for Donald Trump because things are getting out of control. Things are getting out of control in our country, and it's because of the rhetoric that has come from the White House, that has come from legacy media, who are total in cahoots with the White House, with Joe Biden, and the academia, who has for decades and decades and decades brainwashed young people into thinking that the only way forward is through this progressive utopia that they theorize about and can't actually implement. And so yeah, I decided last night I was going to vote for Donald Trump. Not that means anything to anybody, but I couldn't just sit there and watch somebody try to slaughter the president and not say, this is absolutely crazy and this needs to stop. And the best shot at that is voting for somebody who is not calling his political opponent Hitler, not calling his political opponent a bunch of Nazis. Trump does not use that rhetoric. He does not call other people Hitler, Nazis. And he's not doing it if he has done it before, he's not doing it every single day, nonstop, constantly through every single media outlet in the entire country, the New York Times, CNN, ABC, CBS, and MSNBC, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, these news sources that have historically been reputable, good, objective news sources. I'm saying historically, like a long time ago, not really even in my lifetime in certain ways. Maybe earlier on in my lifetime, they were more reputable, more knowledgeable, and more objective. But now they're just completely throwing shade at Trump, telling people that he is the absolute and total complete threat to democracy, that if he gets voted into office, he will end democracy. And this kind of leads into the rhetoric that is now following up the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which is this morning, people from ABC News, I believe, and I'm going to pull this video up and we can watch it. The rhetoric coming from the legacy media less than 24 hours after somebody attempted to assassinate Donald Trump. The rhetoric was, I'm pulling it up right here, so give me 1 second. Yeah, so you have ABC News, ABC This Week, saying that. Well, I'll just let you listen to it, and then we'll talk about it. So here we go.
And Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, President Trump and his supporters have contributed to this violent rhetoric as well.
Well, absolutely, George. We were just looking back this morning at some of the things that former President Trump has said. He warned last March of potential death and destruction if he were charged by the Manhattan District Attorney. Our country is being destroyed as they tell us to be peaceful. Trump in January warned of bedlam in the country if the criminal charges against him succeeded. And of course, in March, he said, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That will be the least of it. He said he was partly joking and that was taken out of context. But those are indeed his words. And you have heard it from supporters as well. And supporters are certainly in some parts angry. And let's remember January 6th. In so many ways for the campaign, January 6th will probably be in the background after yesterday's event. This is a very difficult time for this campaign. I'm sure this week in Milwaukee that President Trump will highlight this, and President Biden is going to have to figure out how to go forward with this campaign.
So that was ABC News. I can't remember both these anchors' names. They're both boomer old hags who have been in legacy media for 1,000 years and are total puppets of the left, and everybody knows that. But the quote, was President Trump and his supporters have contributed to this violent rhetoric, right? So the left, within 24 hours of somebody trying to assassinate Donald Trump, is saying the reason somebody tried to assassinate Donald Trump is because of Donald Trump and the right. That has nothing to do with anything. It doesn't have anything to do with political ideology. It has nothing to do with the fact that ABC News and every other legacy media outlet in the entire country has pushed a particular left-wing liberal agenda and a fear-mongering narrative that Donald Trump is going to be the next Hitler, is going to implement Nazism, and is going to be a fascist, and is going to kill all of his political opponents and end democracy. That has nothing to do with it. It's actually President Trump and his supporters, their rhetoric, which they don't specify, but their rhetoric, and they do specify some of Donald Trump's rhetoric, but they rip it all out of context and they manipulate it and don't use it within its proper context. And they say the reason that this happened is it's Donald Trump's fault. It's not anybody else's fault. It's Donald Trump's fault. And this is the continual lies of the left-wing media and liberal media, and this obviously comes from the liberal foundation, political philosophical foundation, that there is no basis for truth. And if you need to gain political power, which the left wants political power, it's okay to lie. It's okay to manipulate. It's okay to deceive people. It's okay to make things up, and it's okay to scare people and intimidate people into doing what you want them to do. And that's what is happening literally within 24 hours of Donald. I don't even know how to think about this. Within 24 hours of the former president of the United States being shot at, and within centimeters of being killed and assassinated, these people on legacy media are blaming it on Donald Trump. The reason Donald Trump was almost assassinated is because Donald Trump wanted to be assassinated. That's the rhetoric, and it's really, really genius. Actually, it's really sick and disgusting rhetoric, and it's not really surprising though. And it's a horrible thing. It's a terrible thing that has happened, and it's a terrible response. And I encourage people to go and I have watched a ton of different stuff. I watched the live stream on Fox News, Sean Hannity talk about what was going on in real time. I watched the live stream with Michael Knowles on the Daily Wire, which I thought was very, very good, very helpful. They were interviewing people who were at the rally, talking to people who were actually there, one guy has seen the gunman go up on top of the building 150 yards away from Trump and tried to alert the police, alert everybody. I encourage people to go watch these other sources. The Ben Shapiro show just came out with something today talking about this. If you go on Twitter, everybody's talking about it. It's the only thing that people are talking about. Trump seems to be okay. He seems to be fine. He's going to continue campaigning. He's going to the RNC this next week, and we'll see what happens there. There are also a couple of other things that people are speculating, or they're talking about. There's some questions around maybe Donald Trump's people requested from Joe Biden more Secret Service security within the past couple of months, and there's rumor that was rejected. I don't know. I have no confirmation on that. I don't think anybody has any confirmation on that, but that's been being talked about, that apparently they had asked the Biden administration for some more security, and they didn't get it, and that could have played a role in this. You have a lot of people questioning why a decent amount of the Secret Service agents who were with Trump, if you watch these videos, were women. Were smaller women. Trump is maybe the tallest president of all time, 6'3", 6'4". I think Lincoln was 6'2" or 6'3", and so Trump is one of the tallest, biggest. He's like 240 pounds, 6'4", 6'3". He's one of the biggest presidents of all time, and he's got these 5'5", 5'4" women trying to shield him from other assassination attempts after he goes down, and they pick him up. All of the Secret Service agents are trying to kind of block and create kind of a force field around him to make sure that nobody else can shoot him. And there's this big, huge gap right where his head is, because there's some 5'4" woman standing there trying to block him. And it doesn't make any sense why you would have a small woman trying to be a Secret Service agent for Donald Trump, for any person. And this is actually because the head of the Secret Service, I'll put a link to her website, secretservice.gov about page, and then also to some of the links to where I'm getting this information. But Director Kimberly A. Cheadle, she was prior to her appointment, Ms. Cheadle served as Senior Director in Global Security at PepsiCo, where she was responsible for directing and implementing security protocols for the company's facilities in North America. Her role at PepsiCo involved developing risk management assessment and risk mitigation strategies for PepsiCo. What you're gonna make the shift from guarding soda to protecting the presidents and former presidents of the United States of America? That seems incredibly foolish, but that's where we're at right now in our country. And Kimberly Cheadle, several months ago, talked about one of the things that she wanted to implement into the Secret Service is making sure that by 2030, 30% of the Secret Service was female. 30% of the Secret Service being female. This is again a DEI situation where there's absolutely no logic behind this. There's no reasonability behind this. It makes absolutely no sense why you would want to put 30% women into the Secret Service. Is a very dangerous job. You're protecting the life of the current president and the presidents before. All the way back. I think Jimmy Carter's still alive, so he has Secret Service. You have George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden. They all have Secret Service agents. They get them for the rest of their life. And putting a bunch of women in there really doesn't make any sense. One, because to be a security guard, to be a Secret Service agent, you actually have to be athletic. You have to be strong. You have to be big. You have to be willing to put your life on the line. And women, generally speaking, are not as strong, are not as big as men. They also, generally speaking, are temperamentally more emotional. They're emotionally driven. They don't often make the most rational decisions in high stress, high pressure situations. And so putting women into positions like this is completely counter natural. It's unnatural for women to be in these situations because they aren't naturally protectors. They're naturally nurturers. And so you putting them into a position where they have to go against their own nature and try to be a protector is well, it's against their own nature. It doesn't work. And on top of that, they don't have the physical capacity to do something like this. You want large, strong men, so that, in this situation, when Trump fell to the ground, he had a bunch of men dive on top of him. They wanted to cover his whole entire body to make sure that if more shots were fired at him, that they wouldn't hit him. And so women generally just take up less size. They take up less area. That's because they're more petite. They're smaller. Generally speaking, women are smaller, and the women that you can see in these videos are smaller than all of the men. And it's really doesn't make any sense why there are all of these women working in the Secret Service. Matt Walsh tweeted out earlier, and I thought this was obviously a very, very good point, but he tweeted out, he said, if there's a woman doing this job, it's 100% means that a more qualified male was passed over. That's absolutely true. The DEI implementation, enforcing 30% women in the Secret Services, is an implementation of this DEI ideology that you need diversity, equity, and inclusion, even if it causes people their life, even if it is dangerous, even if it doesn't make any sort of sense, even if that person doesn't have the merit or the skill or they don't have the merit, they don't have the skill, they don't have the history, they don't have the resume for the job. like this lady director, Kimberly Cheadle, she was a secret agent in charge of making sure that nobody steals the Pepsi bottles, and now she's in charge of making sure that nobody murders the current president or former presidents, which is a serious job right now as things become more politically polarized, as people become more and more ideologically controlled by their political party and more reactive to what the other side of the aisle is saying and doing. But it's just complete and utter foolishness. It makes no sense. There's more videos that I'll try to link all of these videos in the description that you guys can go and watch of the Secret Service agents, of the women. They're fumbling around with their gun trying to put it in its holster. It's the whole thing. They kind of seem scatterbrained. The men are going and doing things, running, making sure things are orderly, and the women are just standing around kind of packing together. It makes no sense why we have them in these positions. It's nothing against women, but this type of job, same with the military, is completely against what is naturally feminine, what is naturally womanly. And so having women in the military and in Secret Service trying to be bodyguards for a 6'4", 240-pound president, one of the most hated presidents of all time, is just asking for disaster. And that's why egalitarian makes absolutely no sense. Men and women are different. They are physically, biologically different. They're also psychologically and mentally different. They have different mentalities. They have different purposes. They have different goals. Their lives are directed towards, in some ways, according to the Christian faith, that we're directed towards the same end in glorification and sanctification. But because of their distinctions in their genders, they're also directed towards different ends, and that a male and a woman in full glory and sanctification will not be the same exact person. The women has, like Paul says, will be saved through childbirth, and a man becomes a leader of the house, a leader of the church when he is mature and when he is fit for those sorts of responsibilities. And so there's not many similarities between men and women, other than that they're created in the image of God, but they're created for different purposes and for different roles. And societally putting them into positions that don't fit their predispositions, that don't fit their nature, is going to cause serious problems. That said, there's I'm even looking on the internet right now. There's a lot of young people, and this is kind of the saddest part of the whole thing. It obviously not sadder than the one person who did get shot and killed, but it's sad that there are a ton of young Gen Zers on the internet, on TikTok, on Twitter, all over the place. They're frustrated, they're angry that Donald Trump wasn't shot. And I could do an entire podcast on why I think that young people are so dehumanizing and so angry and bitter and just plain filthy when it comes to political ideology, and when it comes to sorts of events like this. They have no emotional capacity to deal with the severity of these issues, and they have so much hatred in their soul, so much hatred in their heart towards just some orange-haired billionaire, Donald Trump. They absolutely hate him, and so they want him dead, which is unbelievable. There are political people, there, Joe Biden, that I think are absolutely reprehensible in policy. They're reprehensible in their rhetoric. I think they are terrible leaders. I think people like Joe Biden and people like Kamala Harris and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and the Squad and a lot of the Democrats, Tammy Baldwin here in Wisconsin, Tony Evers in Wisconsin. These are absolutely reprehensible people, and they should be ashamed of the policies that they've implemented and the rhetoric that they have pushed on people. But I would never, ever, ever want for them to be killed or assassinated. That is dehumanizing and that is evil, and nobody should want that. But a lot of young people are frustrated that Donald Trump wasn't murdered, and a lot more young people are neutral. They don't take a position. They don't care that he wasn't shot. They don't care that he was shot. And that is also immoral and wrong. As Christians, we have to be, and as people, we have to be, we have to see the inherent dignity in the human person, no matter who that person is. And we have to see that it is not good for anybody to be murdered. It's not good for anybody to be killed, even if you absolutely hate them. And this points towards the rhetoric on the left that kind of, I think, led to this event. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, is that for the last 10 years, the rhetoric has been the same. The language has been the same. Donald Trump is a fascist. He's Hitler. He is going to implement Nazism. He is going to murder his political opponents. He is the worst thing that could ever happen to democracy. If he gets into office, he will completely shatter our democratic republic, and we will be in a communist regime in which Donald Trump will be the commander and ruler of and dictator of the United States of America. It's all nonsense. It all is nonsensical bullcrap, but it is the rhetoric that's been pushed for 10 years. And for a lot of people hearing that, you hear that over and over and over and over and over again, from the media, from social media, from the public school system, from the White House, from from the current president, from Joe Biden himself, from people in Congress, from different politicians, you hear that Donald Trump is this horrific, evil, Hitlerian type person, and it's no surprise that somebody grabs their gun and goes and tries to assassinate Donald Trump in the same way that I think somebody would try to assassinate Hitler. Had they known what Hitler was going to become, a lot of people say that they would assassinate Hitler. And so they're going to call Donald Trump Hitler, and then somebody's going to go try to assassinate Donald Trump because that's what makes sense to them. And then the Democrats throw their hands up and say, whoa, 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 we think killing's bad. We think this is all bad. You shouldn't try to kill your political opponents. There's no place for violence, except for the fact that we did call this guy Hitler for 10 years. And we all know that Hitler killed 11 million Jews, and there was 100 million people killed in World War II. And he was a fascist dictator who hated the whole entire Jewish race and wanted to murder half the world. And he was one of the most reprehensible, evil, worst people that has ever existed on the face of this planet. But we're not calling for you to kill Donald Trump. That's not what we're calling for you to do. We're just saying that Donald Trump is the exact same as Hitler. But if you make an action on the basis of that would seem logical and reasonable, that's your fault, not ours. We didn't tell you to do that. And so it's lies. It's nonsense. It makes no sense. But it is classic Democrat rhetoric, and it is evil at its core. And what does this have to do? People might wonder, well, what does it have to do with this podcast? This podcast is about theology. And like I said in my last podcast, one is that I'm going to be doing more things like this, talking about current events, political events, and culture, and how to relate this to the Christian faith. How do we relate this to being a Christian? But also, we had done this stuff in the past when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Nick and I talked about that on the podcast. I think we had a couple podcasts on that. We did one, I think, immediately after Roe v. Wade was overturned, when there was a school shooting in Nashville, when I think it was a liberal, a transgender person went in and shot up a school of Christian kids. We went and talked about that. And so we've talked about the political landscape. We've talked about cultural trends and political current events before. And so I'm just going to do that a little bit more, because I think we run the risk of compartmentalizing our faith away from our politics when we say, hey, this is the Optive Theology Podcast. We're only going to talk about theological theory, and we're not going to talk about how that plays out in real life. And that can be very destructive, because your theology, what you believe, your orthodoxy in the Christian faith, has to produce something in you that goes out into the world and engages with the world that we live in, politically, and in your family, and in all the institutions and the groups of people and communities that you are a part of. You have to live out your Christianity. And so these sorts of events, there's a proper response to them. And obviously the proper response as a Christian is to pray for everybody that's involved, and to make sure that you're not fueling the politicized hatred, the rhetoric of, if the other person on the other side, if you don't agree with them, they're the devil, they're a demon, they're Hitler, they're a Nazi. That's not Christian. That's not conservative. That's not the right thing to do. But you also need to learn Christians need to learn how to respond to things that are happening in real life. And I think a lot of Christians have taken on, one of three stances, as far as I've seen. You have the ultra-right Republican Donald Trump type people who are like prophesying that Trump is going to have 6 more terms, and he's going to bring the greatest economic growth to the country of all time, and blah, 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 blah. And the people who were election deniers in 2020 when Trump did lose, it was rigged, but he did lose. And those people have gone off the rocker. They started to worship Donald Trump and not Christ. And they are, they've lost orthodoxy somewhere along the way. Then you have the people all the way to the left, and now you have all the way to the left. You have the people just on the left, the liberal people who have forsaken objectivity. They've forsaken orthodoxy. They've forsaken the truth for a lie. They've replaced the truth with a lie, and they have fueled bitter hatred and anger towards Donald Trump, and they've created rhetoric around him that is completely untrue, that are complete and total lies, like he is Hitler, like he is going to bring on a fascist a government, and he's going to be a communist, and he's going to murder everybody and whatever. People on that side, and they're Christians. I'm talking about people who were once Christians who are taking on that position on the left, and the people on the alt-right taking on that position of worshiping Donald Trump, and on this side taking the position of engaging into the depths of the flesh and rejecting reality altogether and creating a narrative so that they can justify their hatred for a person that they don't like, mostly because they don't like the temperament that that person brings on, which is incredibly shallow emotionally and intellectually. And then you have this group of people that I am mostly frustrated with. I think both of those groups that I just mentioned are gross. They're grossly manipulating and themselves and lying to themselves about the actual facts and situations at hand, and they're just trying to make excuses for their vices, for their sin, and it's reprehensible and it's wrong. You have this group in the middle, and I don't even know if I'd call it the middle. It's not even the middle. You have this group in the middle. You have this group who's we'll call them in the middle, but they're not even in the middle because they're detached from the conversation altogether. These people who are trying to still reconcile conservatism and liberalism, modern liberalism, and say, well, this is about Jesus. The church is about Jesus, and so let's just not talk about politics. It's not about politics, and that is incoherent, right? It's incoherent because Jesus demands we follow him in every aspect of our life. That is what it means to be a Christian, right? He doesn't say, when they ask him, when people ask him, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar? He doesn't say, well, this is not about that. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Jesus. We're going to talk about me. He doesn't say that. He says, no, pay to Caesar what is Caesar. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. It's like, no, you exist in a political world. You have to play by some of these rules. You have to actually engage with the world around you. So yeah, you have to pay your taxes, even if it's going towards things that aren't good. And in that time, the people didn't really have the opportunity to make any sorts of political changes that would change what their money was going towards and what their taxes were going towards. And so they had a different political regime, and we have the opportunity in the United States to actually change where our taxes are going to actually change what our country is doing and engaging in, whether that be here in the United States or out in the rest of the world. And so this passive and disconnected worldview that this group has taken on, this kind of middle group or detached group, this compartmentalized Christianity that they've taken on, where they try to disconnect their theology from their politics and from their relationship with the culture, is destructive, and it's incompatible with Scripture. Scripture teaches a comprehensive lifestyle because you've been fundamentally reborn into a new person through the gospel of Christ. You're a new person. You're not a new compartmentalized. You don't just like get a new compartment. You actually become an entirely new person. And so you have to operate out of that rebirth. You have to operate out of that Orthodox Christian belief in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you try to compartmentalize that, you're going to become a hypocrite. It's absolutely true. And so there's all of these pastors, and I'm actually planning on doing a podcast in the next week or two on Matt Chandler, who I absolutely love, going on a podcast with Lecrae and discussing politics and certain things and the mega churches and stuff. And it was one of the worst podcasts. It's just a terrible podcast. And both those guys had certain significant impacts on my life at one point. And I'm going to break down this podcast and go through it. Matt Chandler, probably his sermon series on Galatians changed my entire life. I changed everything about what I thought about a lot of things about spirituality, about how I relate with God and what I ought to do with my life. And so I love Matt Chandler, but I think he makes a quote in this podcast, which I'll talk about in that episode when I break this down. He says, I think he said something like, Republicans want the king without the kingdom, and the Democrats want the kingdom without the king. And Lecrae, that's like, so good, so good. Okay, well, what the F does that actually mean? That doesn't make any sense, actually, if you think about it. Like, this is what the modern pastoral rhetoric has been, especially in non-denominational churches and evangelical churches, is complete and total incomprehensible talking points. What does it mean that somebody wants the king and not the kingdom, or wants the kingdom and not the king? Jesus Christ is the king and the kingdom. Those two things are intrinsically connected. If one person doesn't want one of them, they don't want either of them. That's what Christ says. He says, I am the way, the truth, and life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. He says, I have come. The kingdom is upon you. He's saying, I am the kingdom. Christ is the kingdom. He has brought the kingdom with him. He is the kingdom, and he is the king. And those sorts of circular, weird, illogical talking points that modern megachurch pastors and just a lot of cowardly pastors who don't actually want to deal with the culture and political problem at hand make are totally leading people into this absent-minded, apprehensive, and passive relationship to politics. And that is destroying the current evangelical and the current evangelical theological worldview, right? You have to live out your Christianity. You can't reject the actions that are required out of your belief. You can't reject actually going out and doing Christianity just because you don't like how it feels, just because you don't like the fact that you have to make a decision and that people in your life might hate you because you think that it's wrong to murder children, or you think it's wrong to butcher people, or you think that it's wrong to allow millions of people into the country who inevitably every time end up murdering and raping people. You have to actually make stances, moral claims, and say, no, this stuff is wrong, and I'm not going to stand for that. And I'm not going to sit here as a Christian and pretend like I can be okay with the types of policies and the types of political rhetoric that a particular party brings about. And these pastors, and I love Matt Chandler, and I've been trying to get him to come on this podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to work something out. I love Matt Chandler. I think he's awesome. But I'm getting sick and tired of these pastors who are complete and total cowards in the face of the culture and the political world. They don't want to talk about anything. I mean, how many pastors today probably didn't say anything about somebody trying to murder the former president of the United States of America? You don't have to say, "Hey, I'm pro MAGA" or whatever. You don't have to say that as a pastor. You don't have to come out and say, "I'm voting for Donald Trump." You don't have to say that. You can just say, "Hey, look, let's all acknowledge that something horrific just happened yesterday, and it's indicative of the worldly, godless culture that we live in. And our job as Christians is to spread the truth of Christ. And so, in all scenarios, whether somebody tries to kill Donald Trump or somebody tries to kill President Joe Biden, we have to make moral claims because we live in a world. We live in a political world, and we live in a political country in which people have to actually engage with the democratic process, or they ought to engage with it because they've been given that responsibility and based upon their citizenship in this country. And if you are negating that responsibility because you're too much of a moral coward to make decisions, you are to blame for wherever things go negative, because a lot of people who don't want to make moral claims politically love to trash the outcomes of certain policies. They'll say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, or they have all these opinions on how things should go, but they don't want to actually try to change the direction of things. And that's just hypocritical, nonsensical, annoying, arrogant, and prideful language. Nobody wants to hear that garbage. And so there's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of millennials, there's a lot of Gen Zers who want to pretend like, I'm just not going to take a side. Let's not take sides on this stuff. No. You don't get the opportunity to not take a side. You don't get that opportunity. When the liberal political party in the United States is advocating for slaughtering children, for butchering human beings and children and taking kids away from their parents if their parents don't want their kids to pretend that they're a girl if they're a boy, and allowing people into the country to rape and murder people and things like and all of the other things that the left stands for. And if your response to that is, I'm not going to take sides, you have a serious ethical and doctrinal issue, and you should seriously look into that. You should seriously try to figure out what Jesus says and what the Bible says about the Christian ethic and how one ought to live, no matter what situation that they're in, no matter what political society that they're in. They have to live out the Christian faith in word and in deed, and you cannot disconnect that from your politics. If you say that you're politically liberal but you're an Orthodox Christian, I'm going to let you in on a secret. You're not an Orthodox Christian. You're a liberal, because liberalism and Orthodox Christianity do not go hand in hand. They're incompatible with each other. One of them contaminates the other one, and the liberalism is the thing that contaminates the Orthodox Christianity. And so Jesus says you can't serve two gods. You can't serve two masters. You're going to love one, you're going to hate the other. You're going to hate God. That's the one that you're going to end up hating. And so you have to build out a comprehensive Christian worldview that produces a good work and good fruit in your life, that is in continuity with all of the aspects, all of the things that you participate in, which includes politics, right? It includes politics. Just like what J.I. Packer says about theology, he says everybody's a theologian. The only question is, are you a good theologian? J.I. Packer says, he says that. It's an amazing point. If you read your Bible, if you've ever read your Bible, if you have thoughts or opinions about God, you are a theologian, which I think every single person who claims to be a Christian has thoughts about God, has read their Bible. So you're a theologian. You have opinions about God. You are thinking about God. The same goes for politics. If you have opinions about what is happening in our world, how people ought to interact with each other morally and according to the law, and what should happen economically, if you have opinions about those things, you have become a politician. You have become somebody who is interacting with the political landscape and trying to figure out where you stand on different issues. And if you have opinions on those sorts of things, you are political. You are engaged in the political conversation. Okay. The only question is, are you good at it? Do you have good takes? And that is something that people need to ask themselves. And I don't think that they're asking themselves enough in the American church, and they're trying to just be passive or idolatrous or licentious. And so you have the idolatrous alt-right who is worshiping Donald Trump as if he is Christ himself, which he is not. You have this passive group in the middle who won't make any sorts of decisions and wants to pretend like nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Let's not look here. I don't want to talk about it. And then you have this licentious, liberal, and sinful people on the left. They're all sinful, but these people who are engaging in the flesh on the deepest level and justifying their hatred, justifying their wrath, justifying their lies for the sake of political power and political gain. All three of these parties have problems. All three of these parties are screwed up and unbiblical and not in line with the teachings of Christ. You have to build out a comprehensive conservative, Orthodox Christian worldview that is able to be implemented into all aspects of your life, including politics. And so to wrap things up, Donald Trump, there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and there's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of talk around it. There's a lot of political division in the United States right now. And my call to Christians, and what I think the Bible's call to Christians, is not to be a passive coward in the face of difficult decision making, but it's to actually engage in the conversation and try to figure out what you believe and what you think is the right thing to do for the betterment of people outside of yourself. Don't be selfish and say, well, I'm not going to be part of this conversation. I'm not going to be part of politics because I'm bigger than that and I'm better than that. I'm a Christian. No. If politics affects other people around you, and it affects them positively or negatively, which is how policies work themselves out in the real world, then you ought to be loving and try to work for the best sorts of policies within your political power. And in the United States, every single voter has a particular amount of political power. And so you have to exercise that responsibility and make decisions based off of the Christian ethic if you are going to actually love your neighbor and not be a hate-filled, passive coward. And so that is all I have to say about this. I think this is it's one of the worst days yesterday, one of the worst days in American political history, and especially in my lifetime. I've never seen somebody try to assassinate the former president of the United States of America, a political candidate for the president of the United States of America. I think that it is disgusting, and I think that Christians should be disgusted with this. But we have to make decisions. We have to say, okay, well then, what does this lead to? Where is this taking us as a country? And what can I do in my vicinity, in my immediate vicinity, to make change in my family, in my local church, in my local community, in my local government, in my responsibility to go to vote for the president coming up here in November. What can I do to stay in line with the teachings of Christ, to be an advocate for loving my neighbor and doing the right thing? And these aren't particularly easy questions to answer, but it is easier to figure out what you shouldn't do sometimes than it is to figure out what you should do. And in this case, voting for Democrats and being an advocate for the left, who wants to, again, murder children, butcher human beings, and lie to children through the public school system. They want to let people in to America who inevitably every single time murder, kill, and rape people. They want to do a ton of stuff. They want to take people's economic abilities away, economic wealth away. They want to tax people. They want to steal money from people. They want to give that money towards Planned Parenthood. They are immoral, objectively, on the basis of Scripture. They are immoral, and there are points on the Republican Party that are immoral as well. Not nearly as immoral as the left, and so not even close. It's not even close. And if you don't know that, I can do a podcast on that if you want. But that is my final remarks. I think that people in the church need to wake up to the political temperature. Like Ben Shapiro said, the political temperature is getting out of control. The political temperature is getting out of control. And because you are a person and because you live in this country, you do have a moral responsibility, if you're a Christian, to try and bring about good in bad situations. So anyways, I will hop off. I am hoping to do some more podcasts coming up here. I've got some really interesting interviews coming up that I'm excited for. And if you like this podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, share this with your friends, give us a 5-star rating. We have a YouTube channel, Optiv Network YouTube channel. Go and subscribe to that so you can watch the podcast. You could also watch these on Spotify. I try to upload every single video to the Spotify account. Send me questions. Send me any sorts of questions that you have. Send them to andy@optivnetwork.com or comment on the YouTube channel. I'll try to, if you want questions answered, big theological questions or political questions, I'll either see if I can answer them or see if I can find somebody else who can help answer them. But other than that, I thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.